If there's one thing I've learned from my years of restaurant experience, it's this. Fresh, local ingredients are extremely important if you want to eat healthy, delicious food. I'm Sebastiaan Zijp, chef and farmer at The Farmer's Hands. Welcome to the Farm Fresh Table, farm-to-table cooking in Buncombe County. In today's episode, we are headed to Gaining Ground Farm in the Leicester community. Gaining Ground is a sustainable vegetable farm run by Anne and Aaron Greer.
Aaron and I have been farming here in Leicester since 2009. And I've been farming in Buncombe County on various pieces of leased land since 1998 and selling at tailgate markets in Asheville. Since we've been here, we are farming a lot more land and needed to do some other things to sell all of what we were producing. So we also have a CSA and we sell to like 5 to 15 restaurants a week. Some of them, yep, some of them twice a week. Yeah, all in Buncombe County.
And your focus is vegetables, or do you do, is that your main thing you do?
All vegetables, yes. Yeah. We have a herd of beef cattle just to mow grass, basically.
and for your own use, for yourselves to eat? Fantastic. What you got growing in the gardens at this time of year? I know it's finally starting to feel like fall, so. It
is fall, but there is a whole lot that we can still grow. So right here behind us are cauliflower and romanesco and Brussels sprouts, cabbage, broccoli.
Fantastic.
We have all the root crops are coming in, lots of greens, lettuces, chicories, fennel.
Nice. Do you guys try to grow all year, or is there a time where you guys don't grow? What do you do as far as season extension?
We don't do much. We do have a hoop house. We're not very good at using it yet. We use floating row cover to extend the season on some stuff. And really, there's a lot that you can just grow, even without doing anything to take care of it.
Oh, that's great. Do you have any favorite holiday sides? We're going to do some sides with some of the products we buy from you. Is there anything that you're like, oh, this is what I have to make every year?
The things that we always have are Brussels sprouts. We make turnip and rutabaga gratin. That's really a crowd pleaser in our family.
So we'll definitely be getting some Brussels sprouts and some cauliflower for you for our holiday sides we'll be making tomorrow. On our way back to the homestead, we decided we wanted to make a Dutch apple pie. So we stopped at the River Arts District Farmers Market to pick up some apples from one of Hendersonville's beautiful orchards, Creasman Farms. We want to make a pie, so we're looking for some really good pie.
Okay, are you going to add a little sugar, a lot of sugar?
Maybe just a little bit of sugar.
Okay,
so something that's a little bit of tartness to it. Sweet sour,
okay.
A little bit of tartness to it.
We have 2 or 3 things that'll work for you.
Okay.
We have a stamen, which is an heirloom apple.
Very
it's
nice.
kind of sweet sour.
Okay.
And then we have another heirloom that is an Arkansas black.
Okay.
And this is a really firm, hard apple.
That sounds perfect.
So that would work really well. And then we have Golden Delicious. A lot of people think that's just not a good apple, but it'll do just about anything you want it to do. So.
Well, those sound. Let's grab a few of all 3. After talking with Anne yesterday at Gaining Ground Farm and asking her about her favorite holiday sides, we decided to make a few of our own. We're making some Brussels sprouts with bacon. We're going to make a cauliflower gratin, nice in the oven with like a bechamel cheesy sauce. And then we're going to make one of my favorite holiday desserts, a Dutch apple pie. I'm Dutch, so I get to say that it's my apple pie. We're going to start with our apple pie. It takes a long time in the oven. It takes quite a little bit of prep work, so we're going to get started on that. The cool part about this Dutch apple pie is that it gets made in a springform pan. It's a really, really tall apple pie. It's got a lot of apples in it, and it's got a really nice, rich pastry to it, and then it gets a little crumble on top. So the first thing we need to do is we need to make our crust. And this is a kind of a rich, buttery crust. So we have all-purpose flour, sugar, mix all those dry ingredients together, a little pinch of salt, and then I'm just gonna mix those together. We've got about 2.5 sticks of butter that are going to be going into this pastry, and it is at room temperature, as you can see. I mean, it's pretty easily able to just break it into chunks. And I like doing this dough by hand. You can do it in a food processor, like you would make a pastry dough or anything like that, but I prefer to do it by hand, get my hands in there. I'm going to transfer this to a somewhat larger bowl, make it a little easier for me to work with. And then just with my hands and the tips of my fingers, I'm just going to massage that butter into that flour and sugar mixture until it starts to come together like a dough. You're going to take this to where it resembles coarse cornmeal. So a little finer with the butter than you would for like a pie dough or pastry dough, which you want to leave the butter in somewhat larger chunks. And there's the final ingredient to kind of bind this all together as a dough is one single egg. It's pretty sticky, as you can see, but that's good because you want it to be able to stick up along the insides of your springform pan. We need to prepare our springform pan with a little bit of butter. So I'm just going to take a little bit of room temperature butter and just run that along the inside of our springform pan. Just trying to get it in all the crannies, make sure the sides, oops, are really nicely coated in butter. So I've got our prepared pan here. I'm just going to take our dough and I'm going to really gently press it into the bottom of our springform pan into a nice single layer. And then using the tips of my fingers, try to have it come up all the way up the sides of our springform pan. This is a little bit of a delicate process and you need to take your time with it. We have our really nice rich dough here, pressed all the way into the bottom and all the way up the sides of our springform pan. And so you want to make sure it's a nice even layer in there. If it seems to be really sticky on your fingers, it's pretty wet dough with all that butter in there, just get a little bit of flour on the tips of your fingers and that'll help your fingers not stick to the dough. This is a pretty large pan, it's a springform pan, so you can imagine that this is going to take quite a few apples to fill this all the way up. So make sure you have plenty of apples when you choose to make this. We'll probably end up using about 10 apples, and when we went to the market yesterday, we got 3 different kinds. So we've got some Stamen wine saps, some of the Arkansas blacks, and then some golden delicious. You can use whatever kind of apples you want to use, like a nice baking apple, so something that has some acidity to it is really nice, so it's not all super duper sweet, and something that is good for baking. So I've made this with 100% Granny Smith apples, and that's actually really, really good as well. I like to peel my apples for this, but if you're somebody who likes peel on their apples for their pie, feel free to leave it on. I just find you get a little bit more of a creamy apple consistency with all the apples peeled versus leaving the peel in there. So I like to cut these apples into pretty big chunks for this pie. So what I do is I take them down into quarters, and at an angle, I just cut out the core from each quarter. And then for this pie, I take these pieces, and cut them into quarters, so you get these nice big chunks of apple. We've got all our apples cut, nice big chunks of apples. As you can see, this pie takes a lot of apples. So I'm going to put our apples in this bowl so we can mix the rest of our filling seasonings in there. We're going to add a couple things to our apples here before we add them into the pan there. So I like a little bit of lemon zest. Just to kind of add a little bit more of that bright acidity to it. So I'm going to do the zest of 1 lemon, as well as the juice from that 1 lemon. And I like to squeeze the lemon juice through my fingers like this, so I can use my fingers as a little bit of a sieve to catch the seeds. We're going to add a cup of brown sugar, and then I'm going to use speculaas spice. This is a very traditional Dutch spice. It's a spice mixture of ginger, coriander, cardamom, what else is in there? Nutmeg, clove, and orange peel. And it's used in a lot of Dutch cooking. You can just substitute a pumpkin spice or just use nutmeg and cinnamon or any kind of spices that you like. But considering we're going Dutch with this, I'm going to use my little pre-made Dutch spice mix. We'll add about 2 tablespoons or so of this spice mix to our apples here. So then all we're going to do is we're just going to toss all this stuff together. Make sure all those apples get coated in our brown sugar, lemon zest, and those nice warm fall spices. I'm going to bring our guy a little closer. As with most apple pies, the apples will shrink while they cook. So it's a good idea to somewhat overfill your pie here so that once it's cooked, everything shrinks down a little bit and compacts, and you've got a nice thick layer of apples in there. The last thing that our pie here needs is a top. And there's a few ways to go about it. You can make a little extra of that dough and make a little bit of lattice on top, but I really like a crumble for this. It's equal parts flour, brown sugar, oats, and butter. You do need to melt the butter, so I'm going to take our 1 stick of butter. And for this recipe, I have a half a cup of each ingredient. I'm going to take 1 stick of butter, let that melt. And then the rest of the dry ingredients, you just put them all in a little bowl. And you just mix all those dry ingredients together. So we've got our 1 stick of butter melted here, and we've got our oats, our brown sugar, and our flour all mixed together. So all I do is just pour that butter. And I use my fork just because obviously that butter is kind of warm. And then we're gonna just spread this mix on top of our apples. So this pan is very, very full, and it's because it's a springform pan, and even though we've got that dough in there, there's a chance of it leaking a little bit. So I always bake this on a cookie tray. It also makes it a lot easier for me to manage it once it comes out of the oven, but mostly it's just if anything leaks at the top or the sides, it won't be dripping in your oven. Our oven's set to 375, and this bad boy takes about an hour in there. Our apple pie is in the oven. One of the fun sides we're going to be making is one of my favorite things to make is a cauliflower gratin. So basically it's I like to replace mac and cheese with this because it's cauliflower with a creamy cheesy sauce in it, and it's all baked together. So we're going to be using this beautiful cauliflower we got from Anne at Gaining Ground yesterday, as well as this romanesco. This will add a little bit of color to it, so we have the little green and white in there. You can use 100% cauliflower if you prefer, that's totally up to you. So first thing we need to do is cut these into florets. And the way I do that, I just turn it upside down, and with a little paring knife, kind of go around in a circle around the core. And some of them will break down in perfect little pieces, other ones will be quite a bit bigger, so I just, with my little paring knife, break them apart. And we'll do the same thing with our romanesco. So once you've got all your cauliflower romanesco, or if you want to just use one of the two, cut into these nice florets, we need to blanch them, meaning we need to cook them just for a little bit in some salted boiling water, which I have going right behind me. They take about 4 to 5 minutes just to soften them up a little bit, make sure they're not totally raw, and then we'll drain them in a colander in the sink. While our cauliflower is blanching, we're going to be making our sauce for this. And basically what we're making is a bechamel. It's a very simple, very versatile sauce to which you can add a lot of flavors and different ingredients, but the basis is a roux made out of butter and flour, and then milk is the main liquid for it. We'll be adding a few other flavors to it to make it really exciting. So we're going to start with equal parts. We're going to start with 2 tablespoons of butter. So first thing we need to do is we need to melt our butter. So I've got our 2 tablespoons of butter in there, and once that's melted, we're going to add 2 tablespoons of all-purpose flour. For our sauce today, we're going to be adding a couple kinds of cheese. We've got some Gruyere cheese for a little bit of sweetness, and then we've got some mozzarella cheese, which will add a nice bit of stringiness and that nice creamy, cheesy thing. And then for some spices, we're going to add some Dijon mustard. We've got a little bit of fresh grated nutmeg and some sweet paprika. And of course, we'll be adding a little bit of salt and pepper as well. So once our butter is a bit melted, we'll add 2 tablespoons of flour. And that's the standard ratio for this sauce. If you wanted to make a bigger batch of this, you would basically follow that exact same ratio, equal parts butter and flour. We're just going to let that cook for about a minute or 2 just to cook the rawness out of our flour. You don't want to add any color to it for this particular sauce, but if you wanted to make it a little bit more of a nutty flavor, you can keep cooking this flour and butter mixture till it starts to take on a little bit of a toasted note. And if you wanted to take this really far, you would end up with like a Cajun roux. It's super dark. Once that's cooked down for just a minute, we're going to add our liquid, and in this case we're using just whole milk. I have about 2 cups of milk there. We're just going to add about a cup to start off with, and then see how much more we need as far as the thickness of this sauce is. So that's really thick the way it is right now, so I'm going to keep adding just a little bit more milk to it. The cheese will thicken it up a little bit as well. So like I mentioned, we are adding a few seasonings to this. Obviously we need some salt, good amount of black pepper for a little bit of kick. So we're going to add a little, about a 1/4 teaspoon or so of paprika, and about the same of nutmeg. And I love using fresh nutmeg, but if you don't have fresh nutmeg, you can just use ground nutmeg. A really fun ingredient in this sauce. I love adding some Dijon mustard. Adds a little bit of acidity to the sauce. It's a really nice flavor that goes really well with cauliflower. So we'll add a good tablespoon of mustard. The mustard also acts as a thickening agent. It usually thickens it up quite a bit once you add the mustard to it. In this case it did as well, so I'm just going to add the rest of our milk. So like I said, we have 2 kinds of cheese. We've got some Gruyere, which has got a nice kind of like a Swiss cheese flavor, really nice with this dish, and it's more the flavorful cheese. So we've got about a cup of that's going to go in there. And then we've got some mozzarella here too, which will add that nice stringy, ooey gooey cheesiness to it. Just mix in that first bit of cheese, wait till I'll see if it's mostly melted, and then we'll add our mozzarella. You can see that's starting to get nice and cheesy. Got a nice oven-proof baking dish here. Take our blanched and well-drained cauliflower and romanesco. Look how pretty that is. I like to kind of shake it around so it's in a nice even layer. And then we're going to take our cheese sauce. And pour it over top. Let's see if you can spread it around a little bit. You need to stir in there a little bit just to get it all coated. No problema. And last but not least, we need a little bit of a crust on top. So I've got some breadcrumbs here. I'm gonna take some Parmesan cheese, and we're gonna grate a good amount of Parmesan cheese into our breadcrumbs. About a cup, maybe a bit more. About, I'd say about a half a cup or so of Parmesan cheese. We're gonna give it a little sprinkle, just a little bit of salt. Make sure that that crust is nicely seasoned, and I like a little bit of fresh cracked black pepper in there as well. And then just to make it so that it gets nice and crispy and golden brown on top, we're just gonna take a little bit of olive oil. Just drizzle a little olive oil. Give that a stir. And then we're gonna sprinkle those breadcrumbs on top. And this whole thing is gonna go into a 375-degree oven for about 20 minutes to half an hour. So this is Brussels sprouts. This is how they grow. We saw them in the field yesterday over at Getting Ground. It's really cool how they grow. They set these little knobs, the little Brussels sprouts coming off this main stalk. Usually when you buy them at the farmer's market, they come like this on the stalk. Some farmers sell them as individual Brussels sprouts, and at the store you'll almost always find them as individual sprouts. So for what we need to do, all we need to do is break these guys off. You can either break them off, or you can use little clippers or paring knife. And so we're gonna break off quite a few for our dish here. But obviously this thing is big enough to do a number of dishes with. So once you've got your Brussels sprouts broken off your stalk, or if you have them buy them just like this at the store, I like to clean them up just a little bit by taking off any loose leaves off the end and just trimming off any of the hard end there. So you end up with these really nice sprouts like this. While I'm cleaning the rest of these sprouts, I'm going to start the bacon for this this side. So I've just got some nice bacon, and I like to cut it into nice big chunks, so you got these nice big chunks of bacon in amongst your Brussels sprouts. I also really like to do this dish in a cast iron pan. This way you'll be able to get a really nice crispy color on our Brussels sprouts, get them really nice and golden brown and roasted really well. If you've got really nice fresh Brussels sprouts like this, you can totally save these outer leaves and either mix them in with a salad. You can saute them like this on their own. You can shred them up for like a little bit of a slaw. They don't necessarily need to be discarded. Last thing I want to do with our Brussels sprouts is I'm just going to cut them in half. If you've got nice small Brussels sprouts, you can leave them whole. Anything, you know, if they're about this big or smaller, I like to keep them whole and roast them whole. But at this size, I find them to be much more delicious cut in half. Mainly because you've got this really nice surface to get a lot of caramelization, a lot of color on that cut side. You don't have to do this dish with bacon. I find it to be really, really good with bacon, but if you're trying to make this side vegetarian, skip the bacon part and proceed directly to having a really nice hot cast iron pan and searing your Brussels sprouts in there. But it's bacon. For me, you need some bacon. Smear this bacon out till it starts to get really nice and crispy, basically exactly where we are right now. And then we're gonna take it out of the pan, leaving as much of that bacon fat in there as we can. And to this really nice hot bacon grease, we're gonna add our Brussels sprouts. And once you add your Brussels sprouts to the pan, you don't really want to move them. People have a tendency to want to stir right away. If you want to get a really nice color on them, a really nice golden brown color on these Brussels sprouts, once you add them to your pan, just let them sit for 3 minutes or so they get a really nice color on them, really nice golden brown color, and then you can start giving them a stir, and give them one quick stir, and then let them sit again. Continue to get on that really nice golden brown color. After these have seared for a couple minutes, I'm going to give them a little stir. As you can see, they're starting to take on a really nice golden brown color. And what I like to do is if I see some of these sprouts that don't have any color on that cut side, I try to lay them down so that's the side that's in the pan. At this stage, I'm also going to season them well with some salt and a good amount of fresh cracked pepper. Something I sometimes do, which is really nice with this dish, is to add just a little bit of chili flake. If you like this, like a little bit of heat or a little bit of like warmth to it, just a tiny pinch of chili flake goes a really long way with this. Not necessarily something you have to do, but something you can do. Once our Brussels sprouts have seared on that other side, after I give them a little stir, I'm gonna give them one more quick stir. And I'm gonna add our rendered bacon back to our pan. And I'm also gonna add a little pat of butter. This will help it kind of become nice and rich. It'll glaze up our Brussels sprouts, kind of create a little bit of a sauce. And then I'm gonna finish these in the oven for about 3 to 4 minutes. We just took the cauliflower gratin out of the oven, and I'm gonna grab our pan roasted Brussels sprouts. Those look really good. I'm gonna just serve them up on a platter. Make sure to get all those crispy bits of bacon out of there. So we've taken our Dutch apple pie out of the oven. It's been in there for about an hour. This is the trickier part, is to unmold it, so it's always a little bit delicate. So we'll just pop our ring off our mold, and just really gently slide that ring up. Just gorgeous. So this needs to cool down to room temperature before you cut it. If you were to try to cut it right now, it will totally fall apart. And once it cools, the apples kind of settle down a little bit, compact, get really nice and glued together. We had a really fun time making some festive fall sides. We've got a romanesco cauliflower gratin, got some Brussels sprouts roasted with bacon, and our showstopper today was our Dutch apple pie. Thanks for joining us. Enjoy the season.